We're live. And everyone, thank you for your patience. Really appreciate you coming back on. We now have full visual, and forgive my...
Alive.
All right, we're just going to go.
Oh, they're all coming back in. That's
I have
great.
a ton of questions.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Why now? Why have we in Israel gone in now? Is it because talks in Geneva that you and I were talking about last week with Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff and the Iranians really didn't go anywhere? Or is it because intelligence, CIA and Israeli intelligence knew that there was going to be this massive meeting of all the Iranian leaders together in the compound, and they thought it's now or never? Which is it?
Yeah, I think there are three converging rationales for why now. The first is at the strategic level. Everything changed in January when the protesters were gunned down by the thousand in the streets of Tehran and elsewhere in Iran. And the president said, help is on the way, and started sending out forces. So that sort of triggered this new baseline potential for military intervention. Second is our negotiation strategy was a strategy of demanding capitulation by the Iranians on the nuclear file. Basically, Iran wanted the Obama deal again to have some enrichment capacity on the ground, some level of stockpiles, unclear infrastructure, but they kind of wanted to keep a little bit there. And the Trump position was no, nothing, maybe a tiny little bit related to medical usage, but they came away from that negotiation, to your point last week, and didn't feel like they had gotten a capitulation yet, even though the Omanis are saying that there was something there. I don't think the Trump team saw enough there. And then the third, and yes, this is the actionable intelligence to trigger the tripwire, which is that it's quite likely really effective and clearly was accurate intelligence on the whereabouts of the supreme leader were identified. And that, to me, I got to say, Vicky, stepping back, there are two remarkable things about this strike in terms of why it's so historic and different from the past. One is the deliberate targeting of the supreme leader. That was always hands off. There was always the idea, certainly in national security community discussions, that you don't go after the supreme leader, that will be too far, that you go after the IRGC leaders, those killing civilians, those building up the nuclear program even. And there were targeted assassinations for years against nuclear scientists, as an example. But the supreme leader kind of hands off. So that glass ceiling was shattered. The second was that the United States coordinated directly with the Israelis, not in a covert way, but in an overt way, and jointly executed a military operation with hundreds of aircraft. Nobody really ever advocated for that, except for some. There were advocates for it, but that was not expected. It was always sort of keep Israel in the background, don't have them be the face of the strike for a variety of political reasons. The Arab street will hate it, et cetera, et cetera. And they just broke right through that. And now the reaction by the Iranians has actually played into the hands of the Israelis and the Americans, because the Iranians are bombing multiple Arab capitals, and those countries are none too pleased about it and are angry at Iran for those attacks. So I think that's why we are where we are right now.
Are you surprised that Iran did that? Do you think Iran was expecting a different reaction from those Arab countries? Do you think that what they seem to have done is bring those Arab countries on side with the US and Israel, as you just pointed out?
Yeah.
Do you think they anticipated that?
I mean, there's two things going on. First and foremost is the decision-making at the command level was clearly decimated in the first 48 hours of the war. The leadership strikes decapitated the command and control structure at the top. And so the targeting was less deliberate and more diffuse and spread out to commanders. And so that could very well lead one to assume that's why the targeting went in the direction it did. But the second is that from a doctrine perspective, I take it as the Iranians believing that putting pressure on Arab countries, targeting them, harming their economy, harming the oil infrastructure to global oil markets, attacking airports, etc. All of that, that quite frankly puts pressure on the United States to end the military invasion. So that this is not about the Arabs. It's not about their role, their position, their advocacy or hostility to military action. It's purely about trying to find ways to pressure the Americans, knowing that the United States as a physical location cannot be hit by the Iranians, and that they have very little ability to harm our aircraft carrier groups as well. So it's a very much of a
Well,
like put political pressure on the Arab countries to pressure us, sort of a bank shot.
right. Well, then in that context, what do you make of the news that, I mean, it seems as if Saudi Arabia's de facto leader, Mohammed bin Salman, has reportedly been encouraging the president to do this.
Yeah. Well,
Well,
it's a mistake. I mean, this is exactly, it was a deep miscalculation, just like the negotiation was a miscalculation that the Iranians miscalculated during the, I wrote a piece about this in Jerusalem Post, just posted. They miscalculated for the 4 years of Biden when they chose not to come back into the JCPOA. I know there's going to be a debate about that, and I'm sure there's a lot of there are people who say to me that was Biden's fault. Well, regardless, the Iranians for 4 years had Biden, who wanted a diplomatic deal with him, and they didn't go back in. And so, deep miscalculation to attack Oman, to attack Qatar, to attack Saudi. The list goes on and on. And so I think that this is another demonstration that the Iranians are the Islamic Republic is extremely dangerous in the region.
so when it then comes to the objective, obviously, Trump originally, said, I mean, there were various things. Yes, annihilate the Navy, annihilate nuclear capability. But he did also, on Saturday, talk about regime change. Um, Hegseth, I
That's a
think,
new one. Yeah.
yeah, Hegseth was less clear, right? Oh no, your camera's gone off. Come back.
No,
Yeah,
no,
don't
I'm back.
don't
I'm
touch
back.
it.
Sorry,
Um,
my daughter texted me. Sorry,
okay.
I
Peter,
tried to get it off there.
no, Peter Hegseth, I think was. I mean, I think there's, and Trump, as we know, has been taking phone calls from journalists over the weekend, and then he did talk a few minutes about the war this morning, and then I was watching. He then segued onto how much he loved gold and the drapes of his new ballroom.
Oh boy.
Only Trump, as only Trump can do. But I guess my question is, so I think there seems to be inconsistency as to
Yeah.
what the objective here is. It regime change? I mean, Trump again has said he's not averse. He doesn't have the yips, quote unquote, for putting boots on the ground. I mean, do you think this really is? I mean, is regime change attainable?
Vicky, are you saying there's a lack of clarity from the White House about its objectives for this war? How
Amazing,
could you how
amazing.
could you think that?
No, amazing, right? Amazing.
I mean, look, I think the objectives are pretty clear though in the broad stroke sense, but not in the hard sort of like clarity that one would hope to have from a military planning perspective. So the objectives in the near term were a shock and awe type of surprise attack, hit the supreme leader and the leadership, create pressure on the Iranian regime to potentially collapse, not necessarily go in and conduct change by physically taking out the leadership like Maduro or Saddam or, Gaddafi, for God's sake. Let's come up with all the names, right? But
Mm.
to try to do that strike and then see, and the president said it, I don't think he's lying. Let's see the street rise up. Now it's your turn. I gave you the conditions to overthrow the regime. And so now let's wait and see. So there's a couple of questions and then 2 points here that are in the back of my mind on this. One is, will we, the United States and Israel as well, by extension, provide air cover, air support for the Iranian people if there is some level of on the street activity, if there are some opposition groups that coalesce and come together? Now, we've got a bad history in this count. Remember the Marsh Arabs after the Gulf War in 91, President Bush, Papa Bush, called on them to rise up, and then the then the Saddam regime came in and used attack helicopters and massacred them by the thousands. A deep betrayal. Will we not let that happen? Right. So that's question A, and then question B is, and this is where Congress should play a role, and where I would say to my Democratic friends in Congress, think this way too, not just about how to vote against war powers and stop the president from the war, which will not legally occur because they may even pass the bill barely, but he'll veto it and they won't be able to override it. Think about the policy, shape the contours. We are where we are. And what is the end state? How do you get to the end state? What are we doing with our regional allies? And, what is that day after plan going to look like? Are we willing to sue for peace, or are the Iranians willing to sue for peace? Are the back channels happening right now with Pezeshkian, who's the president? That stuff is not clear. They're going to brief Congress. I've organized those briefings when I was at the State Department with all members and then with small briefings. The small briefings will be better than the big briefing. You'll hear about the big briefing. It'll all leak. We probably won't know much more. They won't know much more from that classified big briefing than what we get in the news. But the small briefings will be better. And I assume there is some level of planning. And that's where they need to be really smart right now for this day after scenario planning while they continue to conduct operations. And will they support, will we be the Air Force of the Iranian people in protecting them if there is truly an uprising?
Right. Well, I was listening this morning. I mean, apparently most of Iran still doesn't have Wi-Fi. Um, and whatever I was listening to suggested that, that would be step one, but for the Iranian people to really understand what's going on, they need access to the internet. Is one thing. I mean, I don't
So
know.
Starlink could get in there, right? And we
Right.
we 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 have ways as well through the eyes in the sky or satellite infrastructure to push in internet access as well. But sorry to interrupt you with that.
Yeah, yeah, Well, and then you come to this other, question, which is, we do know that many of the people in Iran, hate this, hated, the regime, but they are unarmed, they're untrained, and
Right.
you still have a Revolutionary Guard that, is very strong and armed and trained. So,
That's right.
so, realistically, what's the outcome here?
But this is where people who get worried about where this heads have a fair argument to make, which is if the Iranian people on the ground do not take control, let's just speak that broadly, will we, the United States, do that? Will the Israelis do that? Will we go on the ground to physically extract the leadership? Now, if past this prologue in Venezuela, the answer is no, we did not do that. Uh, the president does not want to get into that if he can avoid it, it sounds like to me. And so then the question is are we able to disconnect parts of the regime through intelligence operations and other kinds of gambits and strikes to have them sort of internally change? And that is always a possibility. And then when it comes to the people, the mass protest wave, can it occur? It can occur. And this goes to my point, if there are attempts to massacre people like there was a month ago,
Mm.
what will we do in response? If there is no response, and again, look, I don't think anybody has a hard crystal ball. I'm bringing up a lot of examples to try to say there's a lot of ways this could roll. Think about Syria. In Syria, for many years, the Assad regime killed 600,000 people, backed by Iran. They killed 600,000 people. And when they collapsed, it was like almost overnight. And there was a paramilitary force that clearly al-Shara led without a doubt. But when the regime collapsed, it like melted away. It collapsed. People just walked away like, wasn't me. I didn't do it. So you never know. And I guess this is really the big existential question about the way forward on Iran is there are groups, there's like the MEK, which is deeply problematic. There's a variety of other ethnic groups that have their their resources, but they're not deeply well trained and well armed. But I guess what I'm getting at is, are we as a government and our partners and allies and others we work with doing what we can to try to identify and support entities and groups inside Iran who can take power and to undermine the existing regime and infrastructure? And when you take out the supreme leader, because of this, which is what we've done, this is the X factor that could change all that dynamic. They've not yet named a new supreme leader. There's internal politics in Iran too. There are reasonable people there who may say, we gotta shift now. And so those are the dynamics. So I don't have a hard answer, but I also think that people who say, well, that can't work because the IRGC has all the guns, also are overselling that point too.
I get the sense that even though, there are Democrats are saying this was illegal,
Right.
he needed to get he needed to get Congress on board. The War Powers Act very clearly states that, and he didn't do that. And historically, when a president hasn't gone to Congress, it's been for much smaller hits. It's not before we've actually gone to war.
Yeah. Right.
But I get the sense, given that this initial strike obviously was so successful in wiping out 49 people at the top of Iranians' leadership. I mean, what is your, I sense a bit of energy from you, Joel. I mean, do you feel it? Is your feeling that it may have been illegal, but maybe it was a good thing?
Yeah, I've been in some debates on this one. I support the strike against the supreme leader. I think that Iran blew it. I think they asked for it. I think they blew it on the negotiation. That doesn't mean that I want to see a mass invasion, and that doesn't mean that I think that we have all the right answers in how to go forward. And we have to be very careful. Military action is horrible. Death is clearly is something that we should never celebrate. And we should also honor the service of the people who are fighting on our behalf. And that's how I see this. I view this as American service members fighting on our behalf. And some have already passed, and it is a horrible thing. And so that's sort of the backdrop of it. But I think, when it comes to the legality question of it, from a political perspective, Democrats are sort of playing with the free hand. Because Trump already made the decision. Democrats can vote no, and basically it'll continue. The policy will continue. A responsible position from Democrats, though, going forward should be more than just saying, no, it's his war and we're out. It should be, it's a national interest. It has been for 4+ decades of the United States and both parties, presidents and members of Congress, to deal with a difficult, challenging, harsh Iran. And it's in our national interest to ensure that we get this right. And the criticism of the process will be made, but I got to tell you, George W. Bush followed the process in 2003, 2002. He got an authorization from Congress. He went to the UN and got a 15-0 vote, and he invaded, and it worked out horribly, right? I mean, just because the process is good and done well does not guarantee that it's going to be a good outcome. And so I think we need to make sure that we're not just focusing on process, but we're focusing on substance. But the process can enable a better substance. And this is where Congress should be pushing hard right now, asking the hardest of hard questions, because I don't know what kind of deliberation they had internally inside the administration. I'm sure there was some. I can make my critique, I can be snarky about it. But I think, frankly, Congress, having worked in Congress, I worked in the Senate as a staffer, I was the liaison to the House for the State Department in the Obama administration. I've worked as a career guy in state. When you have a really smart Congress asking really hard questions and pushing, you get better policy outcomes. And that's where Congress should be trying to
Right.
steer this, because it's an American investment now. It's not just one guy at the top.
Right. This is
That's
more.
my constructive
Yeah, no,
critique here.
and well observed. I mean, I will say that I felt watching Hegseth's press conference disappointed, because you feel like momentous moments like this.
Yeah.
You want to see people rise and not
Yep.
become petty. And I thought his answers to journalists were extremely snotty, unnecessary.
And
So
and if I can, I'm disappointed they didn't go on the Sunday shows, right? Look, let's put on our
yeah,
Washington hat. You know, all the shows were available to them on Sunday, right? All of the shows were available. Was that yesterday? I think it was yesterday. And we're in a war. You got to be out there pushing your message. And they didn't show up. And that makes me nervous. It means they don't want to answer the hard questions.
right. Well, he talked. I mean, Hegseth was very rude, right, to the NBC reporter, saying, I'm not going to tell you how long it's going to go on because I'm not going to tip off the enemy. But there is a way, right, of handling. I agree. There is a way of handling
Not helpful.
messaging without without doing that. Um, you talked last time you and I talked. We talked about the fact that um, the US was gathering its armada alone. Well, obviously, that Israel is there with them alongside.
Yeah.
But I mean, and we also know now we've seen the Gulf states seem we don't know if they would go actually join forces, right? But we've seen them express support, for the US and all that.
Correct.
And we've even seen the British, who Keir Starmer has now let the Americans use the airbase that Trump had wanted, but only but for a limited purpose. But nonetheless, they have done a U-turn, and you've seen a drone attack, I think, a British airbase in Cyprus. So, what
Right.
are you feeling about the global? I mean, allies. I mean, are we still so alone?
Yeah, sure points to the opposite, doesn't it? And let's add to the point about Europe. You know, Iran chose to provide drone technology to Russia during the Ukraine war. Iran got involved in a war in Europe on behalf of Russia. Okay, so there's not like a lot of latent like love for the Islamic Republic across the board. What is fascinating is to see is that sort of this effort by President Trump to do it unilaterally plus Israel has not backfired around the world. That just goes to show you the depth of antipathy that there is globally towards Iran and the Islamic Republic. Now, I think there's also fear of President Trump, and many countries don't want to publicly be on the wrong side of that and criticize that. And so I think he's got a bit of a honeymoon, a bit of a window, but also the behavior of the Iranians, when they striking all these countries who had nothing to do with this, maybe they did privately, maybe they advocated and all, but basically nothing to do with it, doesn't win you friends. Now, how long will that last for? This is war. We could have something horrible happen. We could see a massive killing of civilians in Iran by the United States by error. We could see a building knocked down in Abu Dhabi by intent or by error. We could see a lot of bad things. And that can certainly change dynamics. But right now, at this moment, steady state, the big question is how much supply do we have? And this goes to the broader global issues, Russia and China watching. Are we going to deplete our stocks? It's interesting, Vicky. The national security strategy talked about regional hegemonies and sort of priorities. And so it said, we get the Western Hemisphere, basically Russia gets Europe and China gets Asia. And the fourth priority in our national security strategy was the Middle East.
Mm.
Well, whoa, that skipped the line, didn't it? And so now, what are the Chinese going to do and the Russians? There are two thoughts here. One is they look at our technology and think, that is awesome and we don't want to mess with it. The other is the United States is tied down again and expending a lot of its ordnance, and we have a window. So those are other assets there. But from an isolated perspective, no, I don't think we're seeing the world pile in, but we also aren't seeing the world reject it.
And what about the, Trump and Hegseth's claim that Iran was very close to having a nuclear, they were very close. They were having a
I wish
shield,
they didn't.
able to have a shield, and they were, really close to being able to get to us. I mean, I couldn't quite understand that because, as we talked about last time, back in January when we, bombed their the whole point of the bunker buster, I thought, was that we got rid of
That's
the
right.
capability. And so
Right.
suddenly we're being told, well, actually, they're days away. So what is it?
Yeah, no, they created a messaging vulnerability there, didn't they? They really undercut what they've been advocating or stating for a number of months. But there has been evidence, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, there is some evidence that stockpiles of enriched uranium are in a new facility that was not declared that they're concerned about. So it's not as if they haven't continued to move their program. And I think that, to me, is the broader point, which is not that they were days away from getting a nuclear weapon they could shoot into a European capital. No, that is not the case. And their facilities were devastated. The point is that they were wanting to reconstitute the program. And,
Right.
and all the expert community basically said that is sort of the way they're going to be. And so that, to me, led at that table, there were basically two fundamental worldviews of what Iran should have on its nuclear file. There was the Iranian view that it should have something, and then there was the American view it should have nothing, to boil it down to simplicity. And they clashed in the last negotiation. And so while the sort of hyping about the threat being imminent right now is overstated, the intellectual underpinning of that, which is that Iran does want to reconstitute, is accurate. And I think that was where you basically President Trump looked at it and said, well, forget it. Now, one last thing to say. The Iranians wanted the Obama deal back, right? President Trump got us out of that deal. President Trump criticized the deal. He said he'd get a better deal. He got no deal. This is the deal. I don't think we should be surprised. I think his base, those who are surprised, were not paying attention to Donald Trump and the way he talked about Iran for the last decade. This is completely aligned with his whole approach to Iran. He, remember, assassinated Qasem Soleimani, the head of the IRGC, in early 2020. Like, this is what he does on Iran. So for those who on the left as well, my party, who were like, oh, he wouldn't do this, they were fooling themselves. They were conned, they were duped, whatever. But the reality is that the Iranians did want certainly their nuclear program, and they just didn't want to give it up. And I think that was the ultimate red line for Trump.
All right. So were you, when you woke up on Saturday morning, were you surprised?
First of all, getting calls at 2 a.m. On Thursday night, that was a shocker. As a bender, I think maybe did we talk about how I thought, oh, it'll be after Rubio goes to the region. He's going to Israel, or they have one more negotiation. Yeah, I was surprised. I was surprised. You know, the Middle East never fails to surprise. I mean, hey, they did it on Shabbat. You know, they did. The Israelis flew, and
Right.
look, in daytime. So to me, that trigger, what we talked about at the beginning, was real. They saw the supreme leader. They had actionable intelligence, and they had made a decision to do something that no American president really ever wanted to do or talked about, and that is a stunning dynamic to see.
Yeah, so that's very interesting. I hadn't thought about Shabbat, the Israelis flying on Shabbat, and Trump getting a war cabinet from Mar-a-Lago, which, he's been criticized
This
for.
is very different from anything we've ever seen before.
No. My last question to you, because I know you're tight on time, is, there are people who say, when you cut off the head of the snake, be
Yeah,
careful, because something worse can rise up.
that's
I
right.
mean, that the detractors say, be careful. Your thoughts on that?
Like, the devil you know is better than the devil you
Yeah.
don't know. Well, I think we've known that guy for 35 years, and he was no good, right? And so, I guess this is a coin toss, right? This is a gamble. It is a gamble that taking him out of the equation may very well change, even though right now it's hard. It will change over time what happens inside Iranian politics, because, for years and years, and you can go back to the 90s, the Mohammad Khatami, and you could then talk about Rouhani and all these sort of moderate Iranian president leaders who would try to figure out how to work with the United States and the West. There would always be but they still have to go to the supreme leader point.
Mhm.
He's still the decider, and Khamenei was the wet blanket on all of that reform opportunity. And maybe it will be different We'll have to see. And the key question strategically for the United States is, are we willing to live with an Iranian regime still in power, similar to the Venezuelan regime with Delcy Rodriguez still in power? And if so, what would the conditions be to allow for that? Or will the Iranian people on the street really do what they have done before in our lifetime, which is a revolution?
Yeah.
And so it's not unprecedented to think that could happen again. But I do think with him off the table, the gamble is that will change something inside Iran for the better.
Joel, thank you so, so, so much. I'm sure as the days go on, we'll be back. And thank
Thanks,
you
Vicky.
everyone for tuning
Thanks,
in.
everyone.
Bye.
Yeah, appreciate it.